The Naughty Boy. Once upon a time, an old poet, a very nice and kind old poet, was sitting cozily by his pot-belly stove, toasting apples. Outside a storm was raging and the rain was coming down by the bucket. "Anyone caught out tonight won't have a dry stitch on," remarked the poet in sight. "Open the door! I am wet and freezing!" cried a little child, and banged on the poet's door, while the wind made all the windows rattle. "Poor little fellow!" exclaimed the poet, and hurried to open the door. There stood a little boy. He was stark naked, and the water was streaming down his golden hair. He was so cold that he was trembling all over, and had he not been let in, he certainly would have died that night out in the awful storm. "You poor little boy!" The poet took him by the hand. "Come in and sit down by the stove and get dry. I'll give you wine and toasted apples. You are such a beautiful child." And that he was. His eyes shone like two stars, and even though his golden hair was wet, it curled most becomingly. He looked like an angel as he stood there pale and shivering. In his hands he had a bow and some arrows, which were much the worse for having been out in the rain, for all the colors of the pretty arrows had run into each other. The old poet sat down next to the stove with the child in his lap. He dried his hair and warmed his hands in his own. Then he gave him a toasted apple and a glass of mulled wine. The boy soon recovered, the color returning to his cheeks. He jumped down from the poet's knees and began to dance around his chair. "You are a lovely child," said the old poet, and smiled. "What is your name?" "I am called Cupid," answered the boy. "Don't you know me?" "There are my bows and arrows. I am good at shooting. Look, the moon has come out. The weather is fine now." "But I'm afraid your bow and arrows are spoiled," the poet said. "That is too bad." The boy picked up the bow and glanced at it. "Now that it's dry, it looks all right," he argued. "Look, the string is taut. No harm has come to it." Cupid slipped an arrow into the bow and bent it. He took aim, and the arrow pierced the old man's heart. "There, you can see for yourself. My bow is fine," the naughty, ungrateful boy said laughingly to the old poet, who had taken him into his living room and gave him his mulled wine and the very best of his toasted apples. The old poet lay on the floor weeping. He had really been hit, right in the heart. "Oh, oh," he moaned, "the mischievous child. I am going to tell all the other boys and girls to beware of Cupid, and never to play with him, so he cannot do them any harm." All the boys and girls were warned by the old poet, did their best to be on the alert against Cupid, but he fooled them anyway, because he is very cunning. When a student is returning from a lecture at the university, Cupid runs along beside him, wearing a black robe and with a book under his arm. The student cannot recognize him. He mistakes him for another student and takes his arm. Then Cupid shoots an arrow into his heart. The girls are not safe from him either, even in church when they are being confirmed. In the theater, he sits astride the chandelier, and nobody notices him up there among the burning candles, but they feel it when he shoots his arrows at them. He runs about in the royal parks and on the embankment where your parents love to go for a walk. He has hit their hearts with his arrows once too. Ask them and see what they say. Cupid is a rascal. Don't ever have anything to do with him. Imagine he once shot your poor old grandmother right through the heart. It's so long ago that it no longer hurts, but she hasn't forgotten it. Pooh! That mischievous Cupid, now you know what he's like and what a naughty boy he is. The end.